Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the Vinny Eastwood Show. We'll be getting the backup channel going in just a moment. In the meantime, we're just going to give you our obligatory plug for Rosa Corey's Behind the Green Mask UN Agenda 21. This show is going to be a little bit different. According to the listeners, they don't like the humour of this show, so I'm going to attempt to be a serious broadcaster. So, here we go. Welcome, ladies and gentlemen, to the Vinny Eastwood Show. It's the lighter side of genocide. Just because we're being exterminated doesn't mean we can't make it fun. Otherwise, what's the point of being killed? The Vinny Eastwood Show, where the only thing worse than living in a high-tech global police state is Vinny's jokes. And my very special guest is Professor Olle Johansson, coming at us live from the Scandinavian Isles. Olle, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much indeed. And I'm sitting here in Stockholm, Sweden. And it's 8 o'clock in the evening. I have been out all the day, so I'm very interested to listen to what you have to say.
Well, as the listeners will be interested in listening to you, and before we go ahead, we've just briefly browsed over the policies of the NZPP, and I was just wondering what your first impressions is, just on the very small amount that you've seen so far.
Well, I mean, I really wish the people behind this new political party the very best of good luck. And I would say that practically anyone in any country all over the world would definitely agree with your political program and would like to see very much the same. But as we talked before the live stream, many people today, they are awake, definitely, but they have to put their time to their family, to their children, to their house, their car, their garden, the swimming pool, their job, and so on. And very few seconds are left over to think about, am I actually living in a democracy? And for instance, for me, living in one of maybe the most famous democracies in the world, namely Sweden, that's a question I nowadays quite often ask myself, especially when we try to get the ear of our prime minister and other ministers, and they just refuse to listen.
So you're saying that the people of Sweden are suffering a form of Stockholm syndrome, ironically?
Well, in a way you can call it like that, although that's, of course, even much more serious stuff when we talk about the Stockholm syndrome. But yes, I mean, people trust their leaders, and rightfully so. Many of the decisions are very good, but you may remember some of the classical Hollywood movies and Netflix series and so on. When the spooky moment arrives, you hear this undertone of sound, and that's the kind of sound you hear nowadays, not only in Sweden, but in quite a number of countries. And many citizens around the world are asking our elected and paid officials, do they really work for us, or do they really work for something else?
Cognitive dissonance is something that people are suffering from to a large degree, and as David Icke told me, you cannot convince anybody of anything, but you can tell them things that they cannot unhear. And so today we're going to be talking about electro-pollution, and I've called it the omnipresent threat. Could you define that for us?
Yes, I can, but let me first start with what we also talked before we started this live stream, namely, wherever I go in the world, since no one knows who I am, I always lean forward to people and ask them critical, small questions. Just recently, a few months back, I went in one of the Stockholm commuter trains, and there was a very posh lady in her 60s sitting right across from me. And I leaned forward and said, I see that you're using your smartphone. Do you know that the World Health Organization in Geneva in Switzerland has cancer classified the electromagnetic fields, the radiation that comes from it and to it? She looked up and she was really angry with me, and told me to piss off and I should mind my own business, and I didn't know a thing what I was talking about, and I was just stupid. But then I stopped her and said, but you have this smartphone. Please, couldn't you just Google WHO, brain tumor and mobile phone? And she did. And she went silent for like 3 minutes. And then she slowly looked up and said, yeah, you are actually right. I'm so sorry. But now I'm getting angry again, she said, not at you, but at the Swedish government and parliament and health authorities. Why haven't I, as a citizen, been informed about this? I'm not only a mother, I'm also a grandmother, and I've just very recently given my 12-year-old granddaughter a new smartphone, and now I regret it, she said. So I think the level of information, it might be there. I mean, if you take time and look into these questions and issues, probably you would find most of it on the internet. But again, people just don't have the time, and they trust their political leaders to do the groundwork for them. Then coming to today's topic, which I would call then adverse health and biological effects of artificial electromagnetic fields, such as from cell phones, laptops, tablets, smart meters, power lines, Wi-Fi routers, baby alarms, and a lot more. The
And let's not
Internet of
forget to add 5G to that list.
Yeah. That's of course within the cell phone area, the new version of mobile telephony. But all these gadgets, they use various forms of electromagnetic fields and signals, mostly in the microwave range. And when you start asking the critical question, which scientists have done, then you suddenly realize that there are not single papers, but tens of thousands of relevant papers in peer-review-based scientific journals, all pointing to that this is a full-scale experiment, not only with mankind, but maybe with all life forms on the planet. And this is definitely a topic that people need to inform themselves about, because the progress of all these gadgets is colossal, I would say. And you mentioned 5G already on the drawing boards. You have 6G as well as 7G. So the development is very, very quick here.
And I was thinking, does this violate the Nuremberg Code, which I think the first article of the Nuremberg Code prevents people from being experimented on without their consent?
Yes, I mean, that's a very valid point. And I myself pointed it out many years ago in commentaries and said that we have to really think about the Nuremberg Code from 1947. And as you say, the informed consent has never been around. No one has asked us whether we want to be part of this full-scale experiment or not. It's just taken for granted that everyone wants to. But as you know, it's a little bit like in the political corner of the world. More and more people actually now are standing up and saying, no, not in my backyard. I am not going to be part of this experiment. And quite a number of people have now taken various aspects of this full-scale experiment to courts of law, and including, of course, the 6 cases of brain tumors in Italy, all traveling the whole line up and through the Supreme Court of Italy, and ending in that the Supreme Court said that, yes, the patient's brain tumors, they were actually caused by their cell phone usage. And that, of course, is a precedence that will be very interesting to follow when these legal affairs go into countries such as the United States of America, where the compensations that are asked for are astronomically big. In Italy, I don't know exactly, but I guess you get a few $1,000 or maybe $10,000 and a pat on your shoulder like you would here in Sweden. But I know in the United States, the lawyers are already contemplating to demand compensations in the order of $100 billion per case.
Per case?
Yes. and they have, I heard
If I
one
may,
figure.
I apologize. Insurance companies, have they got a problem insuring frequencies like this?
Oh no, they don't have a problem at all, in the way that they already bailed out more than 20 years ago, and said that they do not in any way take responsibility for the health effects of these gadgets. And I remember particularly when I was in London in 2002 at a conference at which we had, for instance, Lloyd's UK, which is the biggest insurance dealer in the world. We had Swiss Re, which is the largest reinsurance company in the world. We had a small company from Sweden called If Scandia and so on. And all of them said that for them it was not the question whether it is dangerous or not. And this is 18 years ago, It's not the question, they said, if it's dangerous or not. They were sure it was dangerous. The only question was who is going to pay for all the compensations in the future. And they said they don't want to do that. And therefore, they left the ship many decades ago, actually,
And now we have in New Zealand, a 1 in 2 cancer rate. Now, that means that if you don't get cancer, somebody else is going to get cancer twice. And
Yeah.
I think that there is a large possibility that the proliferation of electromagnetic fields around us could be potentially one of the factors responsible for this increased cancer risk. Now, I recall Paul Waddell from safespace.net.nz came into my home after coming on the show a couple of times and did a full test of my facilities in here, and it was frightening what we found. The Bluetooth mouse that we had, that was 30,000 microwatts. The Bluetooth keyboard that we had, that was 30,000 microwatts. The Wi-Fi coming off of the router was another 30,000 microwatts, and we had that times 2 because we got 2 computers with that set up here. Now, when we turned off the Wi-Fi, got everything wired, got rid of the wireless mouses and keyboards, and turned off the Bluetooth, we didn't get a reading of 30,000. We got a reading of I think 4 microwatts. That's how much we managed to get it to be reduced. But however, he informed me that because there were so many different receivers and senders of this Bluetooth signal, that it's not just 30,000 microwatts that's there. It's 5, 6 separate sources of 30,000 microwatts, and you don't just get hit with one of them as one frequency, you get hit with all of them simultaneously, which was very frightening to learn for me, as well as the New Zealand safety standards, which allow for 1 million microwatts. That is the New Zealand safety standard for electro-smog, and their logic behind this is that if it doesn't burn you or cook you, then it's safe.
Yeah. And these safety standards, here in Sweden, it's 9 million microwatts per square meter. United States would have 10 million microwatts per square meter. And it's very interesting that you talk about the measurements you did, because thanks to the corona crisis, people spend much more time indoors. They work more with their computers, laptops, cell phones, tablets, and so on. And therefore, the Swedish Radiation Protection Authority has announced that the levels have increased in society in the order of 10 times above what is normally seen. And we went out and made measurements in the city center of Stockholm on a square in the old town. And we reached in the order of 466,000 microwatts per square meter. And then the person behind these measurements, he was, how should we say, criticized that he didn't have the right knowledge, he didn't have the right equipment, and so on. So the Swedish Radiation Protection Authority sent their specialists who showed that actually he was dead right. They arrived at nearly exactly the same figure. And later on, they show themselves a reading of 1.3 million microwatts per square meter in the very same square. So the levels, thanks to the corona crisis, have increased and have increased quite dramatically. And we also made a visit to a home in one of the western suburbs here of Stockholm, and they were living in 2 flats just beneath a big antenna park on the roof of this building. And the readings in that particular flat actually overreached the capacity of the measurement equipment. So it just said overload, overload, overload. It was too much. So I cannot give you any exact figures from these flats. So this whole scale cooking experiment, as you said, it is ongoing. And these safety recommendations, they are highly arbitrary, because what they say is that you should live in a completely radiation-free environment. No one does that. People have radio, television, and other forms of radio communication and so on, you're only allowed to make one single call in your life, and it should be 6, 10, or 30 minutes long, depending on how you measure it. How many people buy a phone, use it only once, and then never, ever again? And you're also supposed to be a fluid-filled plastic doll, because those are the objects that people use in these so-called SAR readings, specific absorption rate. So as you hear, this is just completely bonkers. It has nothing to do with reality or life on this planet. And I'm just afraid that we will make a huge mistake down the line, wanting to have all these fantastic gadgets and all the information on them and all the fun movies and television programs and surfing the internet and so on, but at the same time badly damaging something. It could be bacteria, plants, animals, and or human beings.
It appears to be affecting everything to a large degree, and there's a profit motive here, I think, as well, because if, writ large, the public became informed that the devices that they are wholly addicted to at this point in time were in fact dangerous, and that the cell phone and telecommunication companies not only knew this, but have taken measures to prevent the public from finding out, there could be chaos.
Yes, indeed. And of course, every night I go down on my knees and beg to God or any other force that I shall be wrong. Because, as you say, if some of these scientific investigations holds true for life on the planet, then we may already have jeopardized and damaged crucial cell types, tissues, organs, and plants, bacteria, animals. And it may even be too late to have it undone. Talking of undone, I see that I need to connect my computer to the socket. 1 second, I should just do this.
No problem. In fact, that is exactly the time of the show. Every 15 minutes or so, I want to remind people that this is a listener-supported broadcast, has been going for over 10 years, because you, ladies and gentlemen, have decided that it is worth supporting. It is called the peer-to-peer economy. What that means is the person who's manufacturing the product, and in this case the Vinny Eastwood Show, is going to keep manufacturing that product regardless of what happens, and the people who wish to consume that product, you, the listener, can either A, get it for free, or B, donate to continue its production. So, ladies and gentlemen, go to thevinnyeastwoodshow.com. That's Vinny with a Y, because it's the most important question, and Eastwood like go ahead, make my news. And on there, ladies and gentlemen, there are links to the PayPal, Patreon, and KiwiBank as well. So I do want to thank in particular a lot of the listeners who have been supporting me over the last few weeks via the KiwiBank, as we've been doing a lot more New Zealand-centric shows these last couple of weeks, and I very much want to thank you for that. We've had a number of new Patreons sign up. Very, very grateful to you guys. And if you want to support the show on a weekly or monthly basis, whether it be $1 a week or $300 a month, ladies and gentlemen, please do so, and do it now before it is too late. Olle is still... have you got the plug in, do you?
Yeah, everything is fine.
I don't know why, but I've been blessed with a profoundly good sense of timing lately. So please continue.
We recently wrote a letter actually to the Swedish Prime Minister exactly about the, should we call it, the profit side of the whole gadget-driven society we have nowadays. And we pointed to that there could be dramatic risks for the Swedish economy. Would Ericsson telecommunication system fail in an American court of law and lose and be made responsible for a brain tumor in an American citizen? And if we should pay, as I said before, $100 billion, that's in the order of a fifth of the Swedish net national product. So one or two cases lost in the United States could dramatically shake the whole Swedish economy, and not only the state, but also the counties and the municipalities and the private savings accounts as well as retirement funds are placed, of course, I would say, in telecom shares and stocks. And if they would dramatically lose value, then it would be a very tough time. But the Swedish Prime Minister, Stefan Löfven, he didn't respond to our letter. He sent it on to another minister. Isabella Lövin is her name, and she didn't respond either. She sent it to a civil servant, a woman, who unfortunately didn't know anything. And with all due respect, her response after more than 95 days of delay was blaha blaha. It was just nothing. And I'm just afraid, that at some point we would make us so very dependent on all these systems and gadgets and the electromagnetic signals and so on, but also on the revenues. So if something bad would happen, then it could shake the world, actually.
There's also the concern of simple device addiction on the human mind, and I believe the Mayo Clinic has done some studies into this, scanning the brains of drug addicts and screen addicts, and finding that the neural pathways and people's ability to think, process emotions, concentrate, that kind of thing is greatly reduced. So it may actually be a mitigating factor with why people cannot understand this information, concentrate on it long enough to really get their teeth into it. Could you speak to that issue?
Yes, and they also show that the whole pattern of the alterations in the brain were very similar between the drug addicts and the computer cell phone addicts. And also here in Sweden, there is a continuous debate because this very big international organization called OECD, they have found that the more computer time you have in school, the less good grades will the pupils and students get, which is quite contrary to the main idea that you should computerize school. And maybe this is the reason why certain countries, such as the Solomon Islands, Nigeria and Uganda in Africa, but above all, I would say China, they are now banning these gadgets in schools and universities and similar, because, of course, a country like China, they have a very simple business model, I would say. They just want to buy it all, and I mean with all the whole world. And as you know, they have bought most of Africa already, and now they are digging their teeth into Europe. And if they should be able to always sort of win all business competition, they need the sharpest brains, not the youngsters that are dumbed down by the electromagnetic fields from all these gadgets. Furthermore, here in Sweden, since kids they use the computers and cell phones so very much they get myopic, nearsighted, and to such a degree. So the Board of Transportation here in Sweden, that is legally responsible for driving license issues, they have warned parents that these kids will not even be allowed to try for a driving license because you cannot be as nearsighted as they are. And that's not reversible, you know. They have damaged their eyes for their whole life. And so if that's
It's
the
strange.
preparation,
I'm so sorry
yeah,
to interrupt, but the other day I was using my cell phone significantly for doing my work and that kind of thing because I was on the couch with the baby, and the when I turned it off and then turned back to the computer, I couldn't see the computer as well. It was almost like concentrating on something very, very close actually changed my eyesight. But of course, it came back after a bit. But I was just like, yeah, I'm not going to be staring at this for over an hour again.
no. And that's exactly what happens with these kids. And, you know, I have relatives that practically spend every awake hour looking at computer games, surfing the internet and whatnot. And they are very nearsighted. And then, of course, if that's kind of a preparation for tomorrow's autonomous vehicles, I don't know. But the current car drivers here in Sweden, they have said, I would say pretty fiercely no to letting a computer drive their car, and they say they want to drive by themselves. The success of autonomous vehicles may not be as big as anticipated by some of the companies. And I often go to Olle, which is a small town in Finland, the neighboring country to Sweden, to do advanced measurements of cell phone radiation. And Olle is also one of the hubs for the Internet of Things. You know, your freezer should be calling you, and your refrigerator should tell you you need to buy milk and whatnot, you know. And they say that the consumers seem to be saturated. They don't want to have one or two extra applications or apps in their cell phone. They want to have less of them. And therefore, many companies have actually withdrawn their risk money from this industrial sector. And they concluded that most of the Internet of Things will not fly, as they said, maybe with the exception of, for instance, some types of autonomous vehicles that could be a success, but with big question marks yet. So therefore, young kids, they need to save their ears and eyesight so that they can get their driving license. I think that's the bottom line.
I was thinking while you were saying that this is the beginnings of a major crisis, and in fact theoretically we're already in a major crisis via cancer and what it's doing to our brains, that kind of thing. And I was wondering what solution they're going to propose for this, and the solution isn't going to be to ban all these terrible things. The solution is going to be, how can we compensate for all of these terrible things in a million different ways so that we can keep continually hurting ourselves? It's like eating sugary drinks or drinking sugary soda and becoming obese, and then going to a doctor and saying, oh, well, you've got all these health problems because of your obesity. Here, take all these drugs for your heart pressure and your blood pressure and so on and so forth, and then that's fine. Don't stop drinking the sugary drinks. Should we be thinking about large-scale banning of these frequency patterns, and if so, what kind of a crippling effect would that have on the economy of developed nations, and are there safe alternatives for these kind of frequency radiation?
Oh, these are very important questions, you know, and I see that, as I said before, a number of countries around the world are actually banning, for instance, cell phones and tablets within the school environment. Unfortunately, not in Sweden yet. I have maybe you can call it misconception that Sweden is always ahead when it comes to safety for children, but in this case we are not. There are quite other countries, as I mentioned before, including Uganda, Nigeria, the Solomon Islands, China, and then you also have Indonesia, you have Malaysia, you have Cyprus, etc. But none of the Scandinavian countries, for instance. So maybe there will be other countries taking a lead in this, and it is a very interesting speculation. And also, as you said, for the economy, if you put a ban on something, that will actually initiate, I would call it, activity within the industry to find solutions. And the last 5 years, that's a more and more common question I get when I give public lectures. What kind of solutions do we have? If we don't want to completely ban and stop using all these gadgets, can we do something at least? And for instance, now when I'm interviewed by you, I have an ordinary laptop, and then under it I had a thin layer of protected shielding, meaning that the electromagnetic fields from the laptop doesn't reach the lower parts of my body. I'm shielded off, and that's a very cheap and simple solution from Poland here in Europe. And in the same country, Poland, you have a company called Modita, and Modita, they make a low SAR, a low specific absorption rate cell phone, which is launched, I think, in May this year, and it's possible to buy already on the internet. And the cell phone is called Modita Pure, and so that could be at least a way to lower the radiation. And also here in Sweden, there's a quite fantastic company called RP of Sweden. RP stands for Radiation Protection, and they make cases for cell phones, baby alarms, for tablets, for Wi-Fi routers, and the reduction of the electromagnetic fields is quite good. It's in the order of between 70 to 99%, in some instances even a 99.9 reduction. And of course, it's always a question from a health point of view if that's enough. And only future research will really solve that question. But in the meantime, as a consumer, you have been able to reduce as much as you ever can. And also these cases, they would make your cell phone shock-proof, it's fireproof. You can recycle the case or shield, etc., etc. So there are a lot of advantages to it. And I strongly recommend people to go to their website, rpofsweden.com, I think it is. And they have an English version as well. And just check out the kind of products. They also sell very useful meters for people that are interested in measurements. And more people here in Scandinavia, they want to measure like the schoolyard, the school hall, and the lecture halls, and the home, and the places of leisure, etc. So people, they are getting more and more acquainted with how to use such measuring devices. And it's also very valuable for us as scientists because we get observations from the field. I cannot travel, every day to Umeå and Sundsvall and Malmö and Göteborg and Stockholm and so on. But people living there, they can report readings. And as a scientist, we can follow the alterations and changes over time. It's very, very valuable to get this information. And I don't recall the exact price, but I think such a meter is in the order of $200 American, something like that. And you can also order it on the internet. So things are happening. And many years ago, I pointed to that we should be afraid of sort of losing a few gadgets, because then instead we will be to develop tomorrow human and environment friendly technology, which would rhyme very well with actually started with your new political program and to
Olle,
things in our society.
we're having a little bit of a connection issue, so I'm just going to quickly hang up on you and ring you back, and that should solve the problem. All right. In the meantime, ladies and gentlemen, bear in mind, again, just as a reminder, this is a listener-supported show, so please, if you can, donate to the VinnyEastwoodShow.com and think about starting up an automatic payment, ladies and gentlemen. Apologise for this. All right, Olle is back. Sorry about that. Where were we? Oh, I was thinking about mitigating circumstances and things of that nature, because when you combine, say, for example, fluoride with aluminium, there's a whole bunch of effects in the body. And I was wondering if there's a lot of aluminium or fluoride in the diet or whatever, if those things are actually affected or having their negative health effects exacerbated by electromagnetic radiation. Could you speak to that?
That's a crucial point you bring up. And we have tried actually for, I would say, several decades to find the economic means to investigate exactly these questions. And as you know, nowadays, through water you drink, from food you eat, from air you breathe, from soil you use for your tomato plants and etc., you do get a lot of new additions that wasn't around before, and everything has changed dramatically, and of course worse in some countries compared to others, but it could be a possible way to explain the mechanism behind this, because many of these compounds you mentioned, like fluoride and aluminium, will have impacts on your immune system, kind of just slightly irritating it, but over a long time. And you will constantly have a change, a reaction, an oversensitivity. And as you know, in a country like Sweden, when we talk asthma, allergy, and other oversensitivities, we have risen to very high levels. For children up to the age of 14, you find more than half of them have some kind of allergy, asthma, oversensitivity. When I was a kid, it was far below 0.5% of the population. So it has risen quite dramatically. And we are kind of flying around in a completely dark room, bumping against things we cannot even identify. And in a way, it's surprising that we allow our process industry, the chemical industry and so on, to expose us to all these compounds. And again, as we said before we started this program, that in ideal society, an ideal democracy, if I go to the food store and buy some bananas and a can of peas, I should be, as a consumer, 100% confident and feeling safe that this is all right. There is nothing here that could harm me or my family. But today, you know, with the increasing knowledge, every time I go to a Swedish food store and buy these items, I have some kind of creepy feeling that, do I really know what I'm eating? And the answer is no, you don't. And the authorities that are supposed to be responsible, are they? And they are not.
Are they on the take? What kind of financial incentive is there to cover up a danger to the public if that danger is a profitable product?
Yeah, it has been revealed quite a number of times that the industry, the food industry, as well as the electronics industry, is very much in bed with the governmental authorities. So whatever you dream up, I would say, yes, that has already happened.
It could be worse, and it's going to be, I imagine, before it gets better. How long have you been trying to bring light to these issues, Olle?
Well, I have been working with these questions more than 40 years. And in the beginning, we kind of had wind in the sails, but that wind quickly died away because we started to find things that would explain what we today call electro-hypersensitivity. As long as we didn't find anything, then we were applauded. But when we found especially grave excitations of the immune system and grave alterations of cells that are reacting to ionizing radiation, like radioactivity from Fukushima or Chernobyl, but we saw the same in situations where people had been exposed to only like an ordinary computer or laptop. And then suddenly the wind not only died away, but it changed direction and it went to hurricane force. And it turned out to be impossible to any longer get funding as well as receiving the important support in various official situations. Since I'm very, how should we say, stubborn, I still kept on and tried to sail against the wind. And well, that's the reason why we talk today. We never gave up, but sometimes it has been a hard time.
There is no such thing as a lost cause while there is still at least one fool left to fight it, as they say. And thank you for being that fool, Olle. The precautionary principle talks about the lowest dose that causes harm, and that is, and then cut it down by 10 or something of that. Could you speak to the precautionary principle at all?
Yes, indeed. And the cut down range could be very different depending on if you talk about various chemicals, physical exposure, and so on. And a safety interval could be as big as 1 million times below or 10 million times below, and so on. And a precautionary principle, the easiest way to understand that is if you think about your own house or flat, and then you allow me to fill it with non-dangerous snakes. And we put 1 million snakes in there, and they are completely harmless. But we also enter one Egyptian cobra. But we don't tell you where it is. Would you enter such a house? Of course not. No one would do that. They would call for the authorities, the police, the fire brigade, and whatnot. And that's a very good summary of a precautionary principle, because it says that if there is even the slightest of risks that could harm a high number of persons, and you hear we are talking about wireless telecommunication, everyone practically uses it. And even if there would be one only type of risk, it would have an impact on everyone. And you mentioned, for instance, cancer before brain tumors. And if you summarize the research around it, it's a rather low risk for a brain tumor. But the economical impact on planet Earth, even with such a low risk, is of course enormous. And therefore, one should apply a precautionary principle, maybe, as I said before, using these Swedish cases for your cell phone and Wi-Fi router, maybe buying a low SAR cell phone, maybe doing other things to avoid exposing yourself and your children to it. Very recently, there was one school here in Stockholm area called Spira School, and the leader of that school bought such cases for the Wi-Fi routers, and he was at first criticized, having spent some money on it, and I think we're talking the order of $200, $300, $400 US. in the whole school building. But then later on, more and more people said that they were extremely happy to have such a response-taking school leader because it's better to be safe than sorry. So again, I think the message is spreading. There are ways to be precautionary, and of course, the insurance industry, the telecom industry, the operators, the radiation protection authorities, even the World Health Organization, they have another precautionary principle, namely to save and protect their own assets, their own money. And so you see, there are different forces here in play. And from a legal point of view, don't believe that your insurance or a telecom provider will help you the moment you get some health issues or biological issues. We haven't even touched upon papers. I'm thinking about, for instance, the paper by Tahiri and co-workers from 2017, where they exposed bacteria that you and I have on us and in us right now. And they used the second generation, the old GSM cell phones, and also a modern Wi-Fi router. And then they exposed these bacteria. And to make a long story short, nothing really happened apart from one thing which keeps me awake day and night. Namely, they became antibiotic resistant. The very same year, 2017, the G20 countries had a special meeting here in Europe only about that more than 25,000 Europeans die prematurely each year because of antibiotic resistance in healthcare. And by 2050, it was calculated that worldwide more than 10 million people would die prematurely because of antibiotic resistance. And if you combine Tahiri's research data in the laboratory with the discussion of the G20 countries, because they didn't know about each other, but if you combine them together, maybe by 2050 the 10 million people will be 7.6 billion people. And when I read this paper and also other papers exposing bacteria, I immediately called a relative who is an orthopedic surgeon and asked her, tell me, I said, antibiotic resistance we read about now and then in the newspaper, but is it a big thing or not? And she said, big thing? Have you been sleeping the last decade? This is an enormous question in healthcare. And if scientists don't come up with a new antibiotic, then we will start dying from splinters in our thumb, as we did at the end of the 1900th century. So it's a real drama going on behind the curtains. But she said, we are not allowed to talk about it.
You're talking about essentially an exponential growth rate of extermination of the human race.
Well, and accidental, I will call it, because no one will be protected, you know. It doesn't matter if you're a prime minister or a president or just an ordinary worker. Everyone will need antibiotics that work. And of course, if we expose the bacteria right now while we talk for wireless signals in such a way so they become antibiotic resistant, well, then the current corona crisis seems like lukewarm soup to me, you know.
I believe it was in the first place, but I hear this phrase a lot. There's no evidence for that, right? You've heard this phrase quite a bit, particularly from professionals, trained professionals, and each time I've quizzed these trained professionals in their fields upon the evidence of whatever subject it happens to be, the thing that I find out is that the reason why they believe there is no evidence is because they've never looked or never seen any, and as a result, they believe that there isn't any. So it's It's a very difficult thing to reconcile for me, because to get people to look is the hardest part. Could you speak to how difficult that has been for you?
Oh, it has been enormously difficult, of course, and maybe best summarized last year, 2019, February the 7th, when the American Senator Richard Blumenthal actually asked the Federal Communication Commission in the United States, the Food and Drug Administration, and the telecom providers what kind of evidence they had for safety of 5G, the fifth generation mobile telephony. And after a few seconds or minutes, they had to come forward and tell him that they were not even aware of a single study that had investigated it, but it had been sold to the American people under the banner, "This is safe." And no one had a clue whether it was safe or not, you know. And as you know, based upon the research done with 4G, 3G, 2G, 1G, and so on, it's fair to say that if 5G will turn out safe, then probably you and I are Santa Claus.
That's all I need is a red suit to a large degree. I am fairly overweight, so I might be able to pull it off. But
You know, so I will go even better as a Santa Claus. So let's see. But you know, for me, it's surprising that people actually take such a chance, not only on human welfare and health, but also, and we haven't touched upon that, the enormous amounts of papers on animals, on plants, and as we said, on bacteria. Them in their own right is enough to say, no, stop.
indeed, so in terms of legislation, what kind of measures do you think governments should be taking in regards to these kind of frequencies?
Well, I always tell people that they should start asking their prime ministers, their other ministers, their politicians, their civil servants, these questions, exactly these questions that we touch upon, and in such a format so that they only can answer with a yes, a no, or the phrase "I don't know," or if we're asking for a figure, a number, they would be responding with it. Don't allow them to sort of swim away in any flimsy reflections and discussions. And one obvious question is, of course, is this really safe, 100% safe for me and my family? Yes or no?
Can you say, in terms of regulation, what kind of part do you think that companies themselves are playing in their own self-regulation? Is there any evidence that major telecommunication companies are aware of the threat and are trying to mitigate these factors?
Oh, yeah. You know, I mentioned this meeting 2002 with the insurance companies present in London. At the very same meeting was also representatives of companies such as Motorola, Ericsson, Nokia, etc. And they are extremely well aware of the dangers and the discussions here. And at that particular meeting, they were kind of surprised, I would say, and shocked. And it took them 5 years to the year 2007 to come down with a very simple solution. Namely, when you buy a gadget and you never read the instruction manual, it's somewhere in this famous cloud, and no one reads it. And in it, it says, for a cell phone, for instance, always, I quote, always keep this gadget at least 1 inch away from your body. Some people have interpreted it as being 1 inch away from your head, but it doesn't say that. It says 1 inch away from your body. And now the smart thing happens. When you buy your new cell phone in its beautiful cardboard box and bring it home, you can never touch it, because then you have violated the instructions. Very, very smart. So they are protected. And when I talk with, for instance, American lawyers, they say that from that moment on, the producers and the operators fell below the level of interest, and therefore when they now bring people to courts of law, it's the ones that actually are responsible, namely the politicians and the civil servants, that demanded the rollout, the exposure. And we are back to the Nuremberg Code, everything without asking anyone if they want to be irradiated or not. And therefore, these law firms, they are now aiming for the Senate, the House of Representatives. Here in Sweden, it would be the government, the parliament, the health authorities. And it has, I don't know the English for that, it has sort of sad backside to it, because when patients and relatives will win court cases, it will actually be the taxpayers who will pay them again. Whereas the profit that went to the industry, it's already gone, you know. So the citizens, as usual, are the losers, you know.
Yeah.
But maybe for a new political party, we can change this.
Let's hope so. And just before we go, I want to show you something, Olle. This is my little bubba. Finally got her. Can you see that all right?
Oh, I can. It's beautiful, you know. It's just fantastic.
Oh, we'll just play that video for you. It's just 10 seconds of her smiling. It's quite cute.
My mama loves us. Daddy loves you so much because you're just so cute.
Oh, it's one of the best videos in the world, I would say, you know. Oh, it's just marvelous. Thank you.
And that's why I'm doing what I'm doing. I mean, I was doing this long before I had a child, but now basically they're going to have to kill me, right, in order to get me to stop telling the truth, fighting for freedom, trying to serve humanity. That's what's going to need to be done in order to stop me. And I think that a similar thing is going to applies to you. Is that correct?
It's definitely correct. And I don't think we need to be afraid, because, as I said before, more and more people are reacting. And not only to this question, we could have spent time asking difficult questions about other exposures, about vaccine, fluoride in drinking water, and so on, you know. And there are many, many areas where people don't get the responses and replies they're asking for. And people are becoming too many. So I think we are safe. And by the way, I'm so very old, so I will probably die in a natural way soon anyhow. So,
well, there's something to look forward to. All right. Well, in that case, final words for the audience. And do you have any recommendations for websites and also for people to be able to follow your work?
Well, I mean, if anyone wants to communicate with me, they can, of course. I do get very, very, very many emails and invitations and so on every day. So it may take some time before I reply. And also, for instance, these low SARS cell phones, they are of interest, cases from the Swedish company. And above all, to inform themselves and educate themselves, and not trust pretty faces like yours and mine, but do their own homework, read, compare, ask questions, discuss with their loved ones and their relatives and their workmates and so on, and build a tower of knowledge. And from it, I see here in Sweden, more and more people are now screaming for answers, screaming for true information. So who knows, maybe your political party will soon have a small baby party here in Sweden too, you know.
That is the idea, is that we are in a new world order being set up, and the domino must fall first in New Zealand. Whether it falls for good or for ill it will send ripple effects across the entire world. I believe we should make this domino fall in favour of the people of this country and inspire the people from every other nation to resist this global tyranny as well. Olle, thank you so much for your time and expertise tonight.
A great honor. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Olle Johansson, ladies and gentlemen, thank him so much for his time. And bear in mind, this is, again, a listener-supported broadcast. So go to thevinnieeastwoodshow.com, Vinny with a Y, and Eastwood like Go Ahead, Make My News. And on there, you can donate through KiwiBank, PayPal, and Patreon. And with that being said, thank you very much for listening to The Vinny Eastwood Show, the lighter side of genocide. Just because we're being exterminated doesn't mean we can't make it fun. Otherwise, what's the point of being killed? The Vinny Eastwood Show, where the only thing worse than living in a high-tech global police state is Vinny's jokes.